Do you own your home or merely lease it? Millions of people who've bought a leasehold property could benefit from the political desire for more consumer-friendly reforms. We explain what you need to know. Welcome to The Money Show, the FT's weekly podcast about personal finance and investing. I'm Claer Barrett, FT Money Editor, bringing you this week's news in downloadable form. An estimated 4 million people own their property on a leasehold basis. Well, I say own, but if you're a leaseholder, then ultimately it's the freeholder who owns your property and the land it stands on, and legally they can impose all kinds of charges on you. Over the past few years, there's been growing uproar at how property investors have been able to exploit the leasehold structure. But what hope is there for meaningful reform? Amy Williams, FT Money reporter, joins me now to report on the latest developments. Welcome, Amy.
Hello.
First of all, let's start with what has prompted the calls for reform in the first place.
Well, it all began in around 2007 when some of the biggest UK house builders came up with the ruse of selling their newly built properties on a leasehold basis, which means that the people who bought them never really owned them, or not in the way that they thought they did, and also had to pay annual charges, which are known as ground rents. So some of these builders put clauses into the leaseholds that meant the ground rents doubled every 10 years. So a few years down the line, some of these customers found that they were paying really hefty sums every year to investment funds, which the developers had sold the leaseholds onto. Yeah,
because it's not the house builder at the end of the day who has the right to collect the income from these freeholds. They've parcelled them up.
They were selling these on to investment funds who are obviously very, very glad of the income.
And when we say, the house builders were selling homes on a leasehold basis, of course, it's very normal within the current state of the property market in England and Wales for flats to be sold on a leasehold basis. Indeed, that is a structure that works when you've got lots of different owners in one building, and the service charge that the freeholder imposes covers the management of all of those communal areas.
It's the
replacing the lifts, etc.
It's the communal areas that is the thing that means the leasehold system makes a little bit more sense in flats. It is a lot less common for houses, and the house builders I've spoken to this week say that they really started kind of doing this in a really big way, and also inserting the doubling ground rent clauses between 2007 2011, which means that it wasn't till around 2015, 16, 17 that some of their customers started to actually look at the details of what they bought and realised how onerous some of these charges were. And of course, on top of that, mortgage lenders started looking at them and thinking, well, hang on a minute, I'm not going to lend against this property with these terms. And the value of the properties as well started to plummet because these huge charges were coming at their owners annually.
Well, it's a big liability. So politicians and campaigners are of the view that the leasehold market in general isn't working for consumers, and this is set to play out at a select committee of MPs later this year. Exciting news. Tell us more.
It is exciting news, and it only came out yesterday. So politicians' attention really was caught in around 2017. So Sajid Javid said in December that he would actually ban all newly built homes being sold on a leasehold basis going forward.
Not flats, just houses.
Not flats, just houses. And also they said they would make sure that these ground rents were set at zero or peppercorn, meaning a very tiny amount every year. So that happened, but that of course doesn't help the people who are already trapped in houses they bought on a leasehold basis. And these people, for them, the only way out of this nightmare is to try and buy the freehold, which is obviously very difficult because the freehold has been sold to an investment firm who quite rightly wants to be compensated for having to give up their lovely income stream.
Yeah, which is quite lucrative if it's doubling every 10 years.
Very lucrative. And they're sort of demanding tens of thousands of pounds, and the homeowners don't have that sort of money. And in any case, even when they did understand that they were buying a leasehold with doubling ground rents, they thought that they could buy it after a few years for a few £1,000s.
And you detail lots of the arguments around this in the feature that you've written for FT Money this week, and what the house builders are doing in terms of the compensation packages that they're awarding, which is definitely worth reading. But the announcement about the Select Committee came just days after the Law Commission released details of reforms that it thinks are needed to the wider leasehold system, and many concern the practice of enfranchisement, which is a long-winded term for describing buying your lease from the freeholder.
Exactly, and it is a long-winded process. So around the time that Sajid Javid was getting very angry, the government also commissioned the Law Commission, which is an independent legal body that advises the government often on legislation and, you know, how to come up with good and fair legislation. The government asked them to have a look at the process by which leaseholders buy their freehold and to try and think of ways in which that process could be made a bit cheaper and a bit simpler. Because at the moment it's based on around 50 different acts of parliament, the Law Commission reckons. It's very fragmented, very complicated, lots of loopholes, and leaseholders are finding it very, very difficult to negotiate. So the Law Commission, they haven't finished their thinking yet, but they put out something before the end of Parliament, before it breaks up for summer, just kind of to tell everyone where they're up to. And they've come up with a couple of different suggestions for making the process of valuing freehold simpler and cheaper. And also they've come up with a simplified process for taking it through the courts. So the way in which you contact your freeholder at the moment can be a bit complicated. There are different bits of the court system that you might go through depending on which bit of the legislation you're following. So they're trying to streamline it all and make it simpler and cheaper. And the Select Committee, this is something that the campaigners or the people who are stuck in their leasehold houses have been pushing for. They really want their questions answered. They want to know, whether the house builders were training their sales staff to sell leaseholds. They want questions answered, and they're angry. So they've asked politicians to look into whether enough's being done to help them and whether the house builders should be doing more in terms of setting aside compensation for them, because we haven't really seen a huge amount of that so far.
Well, very interesting. Thanks very much there to Amy Williams. You can read her full report on the state of the leasehold market in the FT Money section in Saturday's Weekend FT, or read online from Friday morning at ft.com/money. And if you're a leaseholder or a freeholder worried about your investment being enfranchised away, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch with us. Email money@ft.com.